your audience to Al-Bustan Seeds of Culture's closing arts event of 2021. My name is Mohammed Ghawan, Executive Director of Al-Bustan Seeds of Culture and host of this evening's event. I will soon introduce you to its contributing artists, but first, I thought to orient you towards this evening's offerings. Home for the holidays. I've heard countless times since moving to the United States. For most of my middle-class circle, home is where they grew up. More saliently, home is where family are. Home, like family, suggests permanence as a resource for emotional uplift, authentic concern, and dependable care, a refuge. COVID-19 came to destabilize family life, troubling family holidays, challenging notions of home as readily accessible, welcoming place where we can reliably and regularly seek empowerment, especially during the holidays. Therein lies an opportunity for many who have enjoyed uninterrupted access to their homes, to empathize with the moved, with the transplanted, with the displaced, for whom home as a physical location, if not lost, is no more than their current address, and for whom extended or even immediate family has long been inaccessible. For many of us, home seems an elusive privilege, even when assured that it is our right. Tonight's literary pieces by Philadelphians from the Arabic-speaking world complicate the notion of home during a time of year when we possibly think about home the most. Tonight's readings occasionally tell of trouble in a way as to warrant a trigger warning for people who are sensitive to graphic depiction of war or loss. Furthermore, the readings are not suitable for young children. However, these readings will wholly enrich you and expand your perception of home, and in turn, of the holidays. I would like to thank our funders and donors, without whose support we would not be positioned to bring you such arts programming. These include public and private foundations, funds, and collectives: Asian Mosaic Fund, the Ford Foundation, Independence Foundation, Independence Public Media Foundation, the Pew Center for Art and Heritage, Philanthropy Network, Greater Philadelphia, PNC Arts Alive, the Samuel F. Fells Fund, the Southeast Asian Mutual Assistance Association Coalition, the Stockton Rush Bartle Foundation, and the William Penn Foundation, as well as federal, state, and local government entities, the Philadelphia Council on the Arts, the Philadelphia Cultural Fund, and the U.S. Small Business Administration. I would be remiss not to thank all of the individual donors whose support has long sustained Al-Bustan with care and commitment, including audience members graciously joining us tonight. We welcome your donations. As for the program, I will momentarily introduce each of tonight's contributors and invite those who have joined us to greet the audience, to identify the pieces they have contributed and their reason for selection. Following the introductions, we will broadcast tonight's offerings, musical pieces bookending and interposing the show's literary pieces, all taking 64 minutes to complete. The artists and I will then rejoin you for a chat followed by quick concluding remarks. We will begin by playing a highlight reel drawn from footage we took of a Debka performance that Al-Bustan Seeds of Culture hosted on November 29th to celebrate the city of Philadelphia's official recognition of the long-established Palestine Solidarity Day. The song and dance performance took place in front of Al-Bustan's commissioned mural titled Soul of the Black Bottom, located at the intersection of Market and North Preston Streets in West Philadelphia. And it was delivered by Al-Baydar Debka USA, a Palestinian-American Debka troupe from Clifton, New Jersey, named after the threshing floor on which an olive harvest is collected, Ayman Shabib, director of the troupe, could not join us this evening because Al-Baida are performing tonight. Following this highlight reel, we will be joined by Ahmad Almallah. Ahmad Almallah, Dr. Ahmad Almallah holds a Ph.D. in classical Arabic poetry from Indiana University Bloomington. A lecturer in English and Arabic at the University of Pennsylvania, Almallah published his first poetry collection, Bitter English, in 2020. He has found inspiration in Philadelphia to work on writing poetry and has been involved with Al-Bustan in the past, such as working on our project, Words Adorned, Andalusian Poetry and Music. Ahmad could not join us this evening. He has contributed 2 pieces to tonight's offerings. Sorry, 3 pieces. The first 2 are from the mentioned poetry collection, Bitter English, and they are titled Jisr and Lines of Return. And the third piece is titled Looking for Shade in Beirut. We mentioned 2 musical interludes that are segmenting tonight's literary offerings, along with a piece performed to close tonight's show by Hannah Rose Nicholas. Hannah Rose Nicholas is a violist dedicated to music as a means of building relationships with other cultures. Currently, Hannah plays in the World Symphony in Miami under the direction of Michael Tilson Thomas, and was recently appointed principal viola of Central City Opera Orchestra in Colorado. She is inspired and influenced by the music, literature, and art from the Middle East and Jewish culture. She regularly collaborates with Iranian composer Sahba Aminikia, working together to explore ways of integrating contemporary Middle Eastern poetry into the music through speaking, recorded narration, and the character of music. Ahlan wa sahlan, Hannah. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and tell them about your selected pieces and why you've chosen them for tonight's show?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the intro. Yeah, the pieces that I selected. So when I found out about the performance and the themes behind it, and that it's about home and being home for the holidays and the different things that that means to people, I actually was speaking with my husband, who's not a musician, and I said, I really don't know what I'm going to play for these interludes because I'm not very familiar with the poetry, and so I'm just not sure what's the right thing. And he had this idea that I should play excerpts from these amazing pieces by the Hungarian composer Béla Bartók. And he remembered the pieces I've played some of them before. They're actually typically for a duo, 2 violas or 2 violins. But these pieces are just like snapshots from different cultures. And Bartók, as a composer, he explored all these different homelands that were near where he's from, and he delved in really deep to folk music. And I think folk music is just really the it's the thing that I think of the most when I think of home. It's the first thing I think of, and it's just a really amazing lens into other people's homes. And when people hear folk music from their own culture, I think it's just such a beautiful reminder of home, no matter where you are. And then the concluding piece on the program that I chose, which I did think of immediately when I found out that I would play for this performance, is a almost brand new piece that's barely been performed before. It's a solo piece, and it's by a very close friend of mine who is a Lebanese composer, Layal Shaker. And we've done many projects together, and all the projects that we've always done have centered around this idea of homeland and home and what that means. So it's very much in line with tonight's program. And her music, her identity as a composer, and her Lebanese identity are very much ingrained in her music. Her music always involves different influences from her childhood growing up in Lebanon. So it's a really amazing piece, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Our second reading of the evening is presented by Noam Keim. Noam Keim is a trans-Jewish Arab who grew up working class in France after their family emigrated there from Israel. They spend their days working to heal the trauma of prisons with people impacted by the legal system. They are a transformative justice practitioner, a student of somatic, a medicine maker, and they spend most of their time thinking about the in-betweens and the interconnectedness of it all. Welcome, Noam. 1,000 marhabas to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for this introduction. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I'm going to be reading two different pieces from my zine called The Land is Holy. One of them is called Sabra, and it's about trying to contextualize what it means to be a Jewish Arab whose family colonized Palestine, and thinking about the land and the way Zionism has stolen the land, not only physically, but also symbolically from indigenous Palestinians. And the second piece is called My Mother's Mother, and it's a piece about my grandmother, who would have turned 86 this year at the end of December. So when I think about home as somebody who has always lived as an immigrant my entire life in different settings and who's currently settling Turtle Island, I think about home as being memories, right? And as somebody estranged from my family and spending my life trying to heal from the trauma from my family, I was just thinking about my grandmother and how even when people are really complicated, I still have a lot of love for them. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Our third reader of the evening is Natasha Yazbek. Dr. Natasha Yazbek is the Associate Director of the Center on Digital Culture and Society and a Postdoctoral Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. A multimedia journalist and a former correspondent, her research focuses on race, rights, and invisible structures of discrimination that have survived the digital transition in journalism, the impact of digitization on war, protest and their surrounding narratives, and the interplay between social media platforms, trauma, and memory. Her literary nonfiction work and photography have been published by Penguin, Polity, Sage Anthology of Essays by Arab Women Reporting from the Arab World. Sharaftina, this is the first, forgive me, The Spin was the first, she's most recently the author of Spin, featured in the first anthology of essays by Arab women reporting from the Arab world. Sharaftina, Natasha, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Muhannad, and thank you to the Al-Bustan family. It's an honor to be here tonight. And to be honest, I'm a little emotional after what Noam just said. And I am honored to be in the company of people who really represent the complications of home, like you were talking about. And I will be reading from Spin, in fact, which is a nonfiction essay that appeared in Our Women on the Ground, an anthology by Arab women journalists who cover the region and cover conflict in the region, which is what I did for a long time. And I chose Spin because it does break with this idea that you talked about, Muhannad, of sanctuary and time uninterrupted and access uninterrupted. So the essay opens with my work as a journalist, technically covering my own people, but for the foreign press, who are also my own people, as a US-born Arab, and the ways in which the stories that we covered today echo, overlap, and in really, really unsettling ways repeat the stories that we have had to dig to uncover about the histories of our own families and how we ended up where we are and why we can or can't go home and why there is or isn't a home to go back to and what these children that we're seeing today are going to face. So it's a little bit about those stories over time and how they intersect with time and it plays with time. And I'm honored to be sharing it with you all tonight.
Thank you very much for joining us. Dear audience, if questions or comments come to mind during our broadcast, then by all means insert them into the YouTube's chat so that we may address them following the show. We look forward to a generative chat with you then and with our distinguished participants, and are privileged, truly privileged that you have joined us. See you in a little over an hour. Till then.
حبيبي وافتح ابوابك، طلي يا حلوه وشوفي شبابك. قدس تعود القدس حره حنون، يلا ادبج وعليها ال500، طلت الروبر طلت وعليها ال500، واحنا رجالك يا الوطن كل واحد بسواه 100. ابو عزام علي القوفي علي ولولح فيها، غن عتابة وميجان وسامر فيها. علي القوفي علي ولولح فيها، غن عتابة وميجان وسامر فيها. يزل كتف بحنية تفر عتابة ودحية، يزل كتف بحنية تفر عتابة ودحية. خلي البارود يهلل ويحليها، خلي البارود يهلل ويحليها. زيتون ودار القمح علينا بيدر ليمون نزرعنا البيار تين وزيتون ودار القمح علينا بيدر ليمون رهن الإشارة يا وطن نحنا حنكون رهن الإشارة يا وطن نحنا حنكون يوم الدروب العرق النصر نضويها يوم دروب العرق النصر نضويها على الكوفي علي ولولح فيها غنى عتابة وميجان وسامر فيها على الكوفي علي ولولح فيها غنى عتابة وميجان وسامر فيها يعطيكم ألف ألف عافية.
This is the poem Jisr from my collection of poems, Bitter English. 1. In the air, in the plain, in the opening of dark wounds, I hold both in one hand. Which one should I use? I hold both in one hand, American blue passport, or this thing, Palestinian Authority inscribed in gold and marred and stained by its own color. To the bridge, the Jordanian officer asks, rhetorical man, stamping my Palestinian Authority passport, and on the escalator, down a piano and a player in the middle of this revolving progress. 2. In the taxi on the way to land control, I talk nothing of that sort. I only stare at the uneventful fall out of a pane covered with worn dust and disdain. How green it all is still, how olive are the fields. Only in case I hide the American blue, only in case I get held up somehow. And how mistaken I was when digging out old things and times, bad purchases, and indecision, waiting for this package, a passport, for my new American life. In my garage, I said, after this, there will be nothing on the mind. 3. The land could take you there by its own accord. The divided pie is being warmed up in the October meditations of sun. And Father's words, I remember a distant, unknown reality. Amman to Bethlehem, he said, before all this, a 2-hour car ride. 4. It's dark now, waiting. I've only known Jericho at this hour, waiting and leaning against a yellow van with the driver blowing smoke and complaining of the dearth of passengers. To Bethlehem, it's considered a rest area. It's named. It's full of vehicles that take and take and take, buses of people coming to the Palestinian side after crossing on another bus from Jordan to the Israeli side, the drained stream that once was a Jordan river. 5. We buckle up on settlement. We see the sign, Jerusalem. We go the other way to where we avoid. We never go through. Always the side roads, always the rough edges of hills to the ups and downs where Palestinian towns around this holy city move with the sound and call of this valley of fire. And as soon as we get a chance, out of settlement roads, we unbuckle this body destined to ruin. 6, the sides of this van, this vehicle to Bethlehem, all senses. The call to prayer, the butcher meat, the blood and bones, the car, the lots, and the open engine, and the air brushing the hand and hair, the slope, the incline, the swerve and bump, and after the checkpoint, the sweets shop in the middle of nowhere. And today, a check, a point, a wave, but at times a wait, and at others, the questions take. 7, in the mind, all wire and stone, and in memory, the iron rusting and railing green leaves. 8, on this island in the middle of the road, how did the vehicle make it up this incline, out the valley of fire, the Palestinian Authority officer waving death? It's the end of roundabouts, the way around Jerusalem, and up that hill after the officer, if there was light, the dome of the rock shines in many eyes. 9, we are approaching, I say. You'd have to back it up, your van, the only way out of this narrow road. It's okay, he says. I did forget. I do remind myself how forgetful I am. 10, by the iron door that's now green, I remember it's old beige and brown. Stop here, suddenly I say. He brakes. We step out. He unloads my small bag. I take out my wallet and pay him in a different currency. And here I am, forgetful and remembering, and dusting off the winds at last. This is another poem from Bitter English called Lines of Return. 1. Give me one hint, give me the thing that is spark. Stop telling me that I should no longer lie to myself. I know I look ridiculous holding onto this memory or that, trying to stare myself down as I repeat the lines. You are not you, you are you, done with, over. Strange you are at home in this house of fact, this house of ruin. You are you, looking past the laundry line, on the roof, at the hills, as all flames have to be put off, as the sun goes down, as the time is so obvious. There's no one, none. We gather ourselves inside. We flatten thoughts on the rugs praying. Mother on this couch repeating sounds. Bowing, are you? 2, at the sight of ruins, stop. They're tearing it down, the old theater knocked in half, sliced like cake for everyone to gape at. the empty layers, all the way to the back, against the last wall standing, the stairs with the iron railings swaying rusty branches and leaves. Say something to the empty seats hanging in everyone's view like charms. Everyone's memory is here. Walk away. Don't look in. Inside, this is your blind spot. This is where you split the atoms of disaster. This is where you draw lines on lines on lines. This is where you reach out for the lemon tree's fruit. This is where you recall the hand pricked by thorns. 3. When I was a child, I was always, dear mother, on you, depending. I followed you up these stairs and you sat, no law, just song. We walked the stairs together and we had nothing to ground us in the land but the hands we held against air. See how you reach for the grape leaves hanging against the rust there. See how the stones keeping the dirt from collapsing are also railing. This is the poem Looking for Shade in Beirut from my new collection of poems, Tables and Chairs / The Border Wisdom. Corrupt and corrupting I proceed. Like a chant upon a hill, I decorate my days with more days. O dreams, do not wake, shut eyes. Oh, how the air can create, how the hours blend, all gone. At once I see, and at all, there's nothing to be seen. Here, an old ache I hold in one corner of this chipped bone. Something breaks, and the pain begins and begs like a slow, sluggish snail. It begs a start that never, never ends. So I witness and wait, and I wait and wait to witness some more. I raise my head to the blue, to the clouds. See there, the old and the new. How time can pass us all, how these walls of old wars have not been hidden. Oh, what giant and mad bird has been pecking at this city. Sigh after sigh, this is the place of far-fetched emptiness, of narrow sidewalks that have no room for steps, the ones demanding and constant. On the streets, the beggars beg. They always extend. I imagine and decline the hands no longer matter, no longer can one count or account. We pass figures, how many? Millions, all sent to this corner of hunger. A marred and martyred language. No one speaks here. We all exchange views. I am beside myself, of course, but here, hear me imitate others. Oh, the figures we avoid are at once and at all us. When can this deranged tongue, when will it cry? When will it sustain? When will it ever grant me life or death? Will it ever grant me choice or a dime? I can flip my luck like dawn. I can drown it among the fish, but I have no length for life. I'm ashamed. I, myself, trying to situate, but instead I evade into my own invention of space as things pile up. Here, nothing gets tossed or thrown. The blood of martyrs and murderers, all the same, all preserved and reserved for the hour and the next, and the one preceding all. The tireless tires of this city, the stuff for flames, the creators of dark fumes, the setters of gloom. I see them now, here and there, buried in the boil, maybe fed up, and yes, fed to the soil. The time is spent on screens, all news and nothing is new. People drop like flies. They want to speak, make sounds. Ashes on ash, a body is murdered every hour. And if only I could shame these days with color.
Fruits of the Desert. A decade ago, on my way to the food co-op in Ann Arbor, I played the game I've played my whole life, where a stranger asks me what I am, and I let them guess my ethnicity. Usually, depending on the country I'm in and the way I'm dressed, people assume that I'm Latina, often zoomed into Colombian, Punjabi, Syrian, Turkish. I'm believed to be something, so as I sit here, they guess. This man was somewhat better than most because he called me a sabra, a term I had never used to describe myself, a word that I'd only ever used to name my favorite fruit. Sabra, a term invented by the Zionist Project to describe Jewish people born in occupied Palestine. A move to create a nationalist identity from scratch, a way of moving away from diasporic identities to one rooted in a plant abundant in the deserts of Palestine. They spread the term before 1948 to help propagate the idea of Israel being built by farmers. Settler colonialism feeds on ideals of back-to-the-land models, on occupation of native crops. It takes what's around it, appropriates it, destroys it. But if the colonizers believe that they are meant to be on this land, they can come together and find common ground. This idea of a nation cemented the hierarchy of Israeli society. In English, sabra is the prickly pear, the fruit of a cactus, a marvel really that such sweetness can grow in the desert. Calling Israelis sabra is supposed to be a clever metaphor. Jews born within the Zionist project have tough exteriors and sweet insides, just like the cactus fruit.
It's such a thin thread to connect a nation around. But what histories of colonialism have shown us is that it's enough to create new nationalist identities. In French, we call the prickly pear figue de Barbarie, or Barbary coast fig, an old-timey term to describe the portion of the African coast between Morocco and Libya. That's where the French encountered it for the first time in their own destructive expeditions towards land they would steal centuries later. But again, the prickly pear isn't native to the Barbary Coast, or the Middle East for that matter. It finds its roots in the Americas, moved around after the 15th century. Another plant uprooted, thriving in new worlds. As a child, I adored sabras, the intricate ways to open them without getting pricked by it, the different flavors depending on the color of the pear. And now I wonder if the only reason I was introduced to that fruit was because of my mother's deep belief in the state of Israel. If it was tied to her own time spent in the kibbutz. Or if it was part of my grandparents' foodways, if they had grown up getting prickly pears in the markets of Marrakesh, if they too had experienced the juices tinting their faces shades of orange and purple, if they had reveled in the fruit of their childhood being wildly abundant on this new land and decided to continue the legacy by feeding it to their children, I'll never know. In early September 2021, Mohammed Al-Arda and 5 other men escaped the Zionist prison of Gilboa. They dug a tunnel with spoons, patiently dreaming about freedom on the other side. They didn't communicate with anybody on the outside for fear of repercussions. They just dug. Mohammed describes the amazing taste of the cactus fruit after 22 years of incarceration. When I read the news of the Gilboa escapes, I cried. It was on a day where I felt despair, and that miraculous story reminded me of the ways we find freedom. Slowly, with determination. When I read about Mohammed Al-Arda, I cried again. Because prison and all its cruelty reproduces the abomination of colonialism by taking land away, by disconnecting us from plants and ecosystems. I understand the need to be embraced by a plant to feel alive. I imagine the joy of eating the fruit of your childhood after decades of torture. I wonder what Mohammed's memories of the prickly pear are, if he too had favorite colors of it. How did he open their skin? How did he avoid getting pricked? Did he slice it or eat it whole? Did he swallow the seeds or spit them back? The ways we all find freedom through our love of the land that made us. My mother's mother. Every time I braid my hair, I think about my savta and her own magnificent braid. By the time I was born, her hair had turned gray, except for a piece at the front that was strikingly white. It was the hair of a witch cascading down her back in a single perfect braid. As a child, I assumed that my savta's white strand had magical powers. At some point, I understood it as a reflection of some deep trauma. I look up on the internet what causes white hair, and what comes back are discussions about genetics and vitamin deficiency. The world we live in often lacks poetics. But I know that in times of deep stress, our hair can lose its color. I wonder when the strand turned white. I wonder if it happened when she left her family behind as a child, or if it happened in Marseille, or if it happened in that other camp they were all sent to when they arrived in the Zionist project. Or maybe it was during a pregnancy, or one of her miscarriages. As a child, I was fascinated and slightly terrified by my grandmother. She spoke French, a colonial French that I assumed to be tied to class. I imagined her in French schools of Marrakesh, but the reality was that my grandmother left her home country when she was 12. There wasn't that much school in her life. The French she learned as a refugee. I'd see my grandmother every summer when my mother would put us on a plane to Tel Aviv. My father would drive us frantically to Zurich because the flights were cheaper there. We'd spend hours moving through security, answering intrusive questions. Yes, we had packed our own bags. No, we weren't given any wrapped gifts to carry. My father never went with us. As I grew older, my grandmother would ask me to help her with bathing tasks, and I'd go in her tiny bathroom to wash her back. She never had any issues being naked in front of me, my grandmother. She had the body of someone who birthed and nursed a lot of children. She made me look tall. Sometimes, in the early 2010s, she started chemotherapy and the hair fell. Just like that, the mythical braid was gone. Cancer was devouring her colon, and her most striking feature had to be sacrificed. My own mother said that she herself couldn't grow her hair past her shoulders, a limitation I always assumed had to do with the intense strengthening routine she was so fond of, her hair flat and stringy from hours of pulling and coloring. My mother, who never taught us how to be women, but who could never understand I wasn't one. I don't know how my mother felt about the braid. I don't have any pictures of my grandmother with her braid. And just thinking about this makes my eyes well up. The only pictures that have survived my many moves and my estrangement from my mother are the ones of my grandparents, awkward at my sister's wedding, and the one my ex-love took of them the last time I saw them both, right before I moved to the US. 2 pictures of my grandparents dressed in their best garments, experiencing deep discomfort. I remember that day vividly, my sister's wedding. I make a point of not talking about her publicly, since privacy is the only gift I can still offer her. My sister, who I can't love without reliving years of trauma. She's the hardest relationship I've ever had to walk away from. But I can tell you that the day she got married, my grandparents came to France, something that they only did twice. First, when my younger sibling was born, the second time for the wedding. Our apartment had turned into a chaotic space with so many relatives coming from abroad. It felt absurd to have my grandparents in my hometown. I couldn't wrap my head around them boarding a plane. They looked comical to me in France. They looked eternally cold. Their identities of separation from other North Africans lost all meaning outside of the Zionist project. Out in my small hometown of Mulhouse, they were Maghrebis just like most of my neighbors. My grandmother looked out of place everywhere she went, slightly confused and nervous. That wasn't the way I understood her presence in the world. My grandmother was a woman who was in control of the world she lived in. She knew her neighbors. She knew everybody. She had opinions about everything. But in France, she was just slightly lost. Her colonial French sounded out of place. The photograph was taken in front of the reception building, and my grandparents are stoically looking at the camera. My grandmother's hair is pulled back. If you didn't know her, you wouldn't notice my grandmother's slight smirk, the way her mouth is turned and her eyes narrow. I see it, and the longing flushes through my body. This is the face of my grandmother's playfulness. This is her playing tricks, sometimes mean-spirited. She'd have that face when we played roomie together and she'd cheat. She'd have that face when she'd throw insults at me as a joke, when she'd call me a bat kalba, a daughter of a dog, or when she'd have eaten meat in my food because being a vegetarian didn't make sense to her. She'd have that face when she lied. My grandmother lied a lot. But I don't have pictures of those moments, and if it weren't for the wedding, I wouldn't even have a picture of the smirk, just whirlwinds of memories that are always present with me. It's the limitations of photography, really, that we only get to see what is being photographed. And there's no pictures of my grandmother commandeering the kitchen and whipping up Moroccan dishes of madboucha, srena, fried fish, and salatim for Shabbat. There's no pictures of her, a scarf wrapped around her head, praying over the candles. There's no pictures of her wearing her house dress and her tiny slippers, sitting in the living room watching Egyptian soap operas while breaking pieces of food. The last time I saw my grandmother, we spent time together in the cancer ward of Soroka Hospital. I sat with her in a little cubicle separated from others by curtains, as the poison that was supposed to save her was being pumped through her body. I remember the walls being yellow, and I remember we took a cab to get there. I remember the ways my grandmother, even in those moments of deep fragility, was still commanding the space in the car, her purse on her lap. I'm glad there's no pictures of the cancer ward of Soroka Hospital. I don't need to relive this moment more than I already do. And I wish I had been better at loving her after that. Once I left, that summer of 2011, I lost contact with her in my rage against my own mother and her own cancer. I lost contact with my grandmother because I had to sever all the ties. I had to leave everybody behind because my own parents were strangling me. And I didn't know how to escape without scorching the earth around me. I feel deep shame about not being part of my grandmother's life in her last few years. I feel deep shame about not being there to bury her body. I feel deep shame about not celebrating her life the way she deserved me to. And deep down, I believe that my grandmother is refusing to come visit my dreams because she's still angry with me. I get it, I'm angry with myself too. And I still don't know I had any other choice. I don't think she'd understand the ways my own mother would use any tidbit of information to slide into my life, how she'd cross any boundary, how she'd call my employers, message my friends she'd found through deep internet searches, and humiliate me over and over again, and how the only way for me to survive was to disappear. I'm so sorry about it all. And I'm sorry that the only ways I can remember you is by writing over and over the details of our life together. It's my way of trying to never forget it. It's my way of keeping those fuzzy memories alive, to insist that the blurry images that flash through my head as I think about you stay there and don't disappear. It's my way of rebuilding the bridge I have burned. When I tell people about you, I skip over the moments where you threatened me with a broom, screaming because you were disgusted I called you an Arab. I skip over the parts where your choices have brought destruction. I don't detail the shame that still lives in me because of you. I don't talk about the unspeakable because I have enough empathy now to understand that you survived camps meant to beat the Zionism into you. I understand that you were told that being an Arab meant renouncing your Jewishness. I understand you had to justify the refugee camp in Marseille, the loss at home, by validating the existence of the settler colonial state you were now part of. When I tell people about you, I tell them you were a true Capricorn, born either the day before Christmas or the day after, the day before my birthday or after my birthday. I tell them about the food you made, the nana tea you'd prepare every morning. I tell them about the ways you named your children the Arabic name of their ancestor who visited you in your dreams. I tell them that all your children changed their names. I tell them about your voice calling me Ya Binti. I tell them how you never used the Hebrew name my parents gave me and would rather call me Naima, hard on the Ain. I tell them about your ululation at celebrations made easier by that one gap in your teeth on the side of your mouth. I tell them about the suitcase full of Nivea cream and French perfume we'd bring to you every summer. I tell them about the jewelry you wore and your hair. I always tell them about your hair. I hope that someday you'll forgive me and come back to my dreams, Safta. And I hope that when you do, it isn't in the stiff clothing of celebrations. I hope that you come to me in your house dress with your hair braided perfectly down your back, a cup of tea, a handful of biscuits. I hope you get to tell me everything that I'm doing wrong. I hope you get to cuss me out for calling myself an Arab. I hope you understand why I'll keep fighting for the liberation of Palestine. I hope we speak in the language of shared colonial pasts, and that at the end of it all, you'll look at me with a twinkle in your eye, reminding me that there will always be love between us, and that you understand that all I'm trying to do is heal you and me.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to Al-Bustan for having me tonight. It's an honor to be here. I thought that since this holiday season also marks the end of the calendar year, I would share a piece of writing which deals with the passage of time and the ways in which our stories and the stories of our ancestors intersect over time and interact through time. This is from my nonfiction essay, Spin, and you don't see a book because I am reading from an ebook. So this is Spin. If this was the story it should be, I would tell you how sad little Ali looked in his little red t-shirt when he thought of his family. All the others were killed in the Hula massacre. Syria. I would tell you how we stopped and joked about Barcelona and Real Madrid, and how he cracked a smile and then we cracked a smile, a little too giddy. I would tell you how for a second the room started spinning and little Ali and his little red t-shirt began to fade. Because what kind of people grill a kid on how he hid under his brother's body and then chuckle because they made little Ali smile? But this is not the story it should be. So few ever are. Ali Habibi? He looks up. Ali Habibi, شو صار معك? I would tell you how I got to little Ali Habibi, and who made it happen, and why, and how in fact it was from the safety of Turkey that I spoke to him, and how I followed up once, twice on Ali, and then never spoke to him again. How I don't know where little Ali is now, or if he is still little, or still prefers Barsha to Real, or if he can sleep at night. There have been a lot of little Alis since. I get thanked a lot for my dedication to the little Alis. It's useful when you can talk to them in their own tongue, because it's like you're one of them. It's our capital in English, our brand. Rasid. Capital. We force our own names over little Alis and call it a byline. Sometime in the late 19th century, the Houthis board a boat for the United States from what is not yet Lebanon. There is hunger, and there are Ottomans. Like a byline, name is everything. And so the village priest begs the family to leave someone behind, so that if they all die at sea, at least the name will not die with them somewhere in the cold greenish waters of the Atlantic. They leave behind Jacob, the littlest. Jacob grows up and begets Benjamin, who begets Judith, who was a little girl when the British and French troops withdraw from what was almost Lebanon. Judith is dead before she hits 40, leaving behind 4 children. There is war again, and the 4 children in turn board boats departing from what is now a disintegrating Lebanon. Then I am born in New Jersey to one of the 4, almost 100 years after the Houthis first boarded those boats. A little Arab born in New Jersey to parents displaced by war. This is useful, a handy cliché, like little Ali. Bayda, like from the poem, asks where I was born. We're walking through the Azraq refugee camp in northern Jordan, and she's playing with my bracelets. The safest camp for Syrians in the world, donors tell us, and it is. So safe that little Bayda clings to my gaudy bracelets like a life raft. You, where were you born? She asks twice. America. How, she wants to know. How were you born in America? And I do it. I give her false hope, like I'm one of them, because both our mothers named us after great literature, even though it's really us kicking her boat back into the very ocean we washed up from. Jacob's sister died at sea. They threw her body into the Atlantic. No one can remember her name. My uncle, one of Judith's 4 orphaned kids, asks if there is something wrong with me. His son is dead, along with his wife and baby boy and their dog. I am belatedly paying my condolences, steely-faced like him, and sitting on temporal fault lines, probably like him too. I was in Syria when my cousin died, along with his wife and baby boy and dog. I think the when is not important. He died in Canada, along with his wife and baby boy and dog, suffocated to death trying to escape a fire. A little pile of humans and one dog slumped behind a door. My name is on a blacklist at the border, my amo says, as I'm paying my condolences. Ergo my name too, and am I crazy to do this to my mother? Everyone asks in their own way how one could brush off an entire family and its collective inherited anxieties, except my mother, who understands this world and our complicity in it better than all of us combined. The week before, or 2 weeks before, on a Friday in Damascus, we're drinking tea near the mosque, waiting. I don't drink the tea because I am certain I will get sick. I can't be sure they've washed the glasses or boiled the water. This becomes increasingly important as the minutes go by, the small, potentially unwashed glass holding the potentially unboiled tea water. Drink your tea, it's good, the stringer insists. I lift the cup and let the steam fog up my glasses. I don't drink. As soon as the bottom of the glass touches the saucer, a clink you could hear distinctly, the square is so quiet. We hear it. Me and the stringer who we did not byline, maybe for his own safety and maybe in part also because that's what we do. Hurriye. It sounds like a cliche. Another American motion picture, like Ziad Rahbani would say, before the playwright too lost his mind. In the months to come, it will be war. We move straight across toward the beautiful mosque. My glasses are still slightly fogged. Men in pants and button-down shirts with batons drag a man wearing a red t-shirt out, face down on the concrete, leaving a trail of blood, a darker red than his shirt. His black hair is gelled into a deep side part. He got up this morning and took a shower and shaved and gelled his hair to the side and decided on the red t-shirt. Then another is being dragged face down, then two more, then more. I think someone spots us because the stringer has shoved me into one of the alleys that wind around the mosque, and we keep moving. Days later, near the border, law enforcement politely locks us in a room for the better part of a day for having come to town without license. They then proceed to beat the crap out of our photographer, another stringer who's a pillar of our bureau, and our driver. I watch, because that's what we do. We watch. The photographer looks straight at me, silently warning me to keep my mouth shut. I try to say something, and I decide instead to keep my mouth shut. They never touch me. I told by that I was born in America. I took a boat once when I was little, going toward war and not away from it. It worked out fine. Safe passage, as they say. I don't remember any of it, no matter how hard I try, but it was the summer of 1985. The question of what in New Jersey would make war seem the better option for a 20-something-year-old woman and her child remains unanswered. I've stopped asking. I think we docked at the same port Judith's kids departed from. We spent the summer in the mountains up north, where Jacob begot Judith, and Assad's troops would later burn their home, my home, maybe, to the ground. Sometime later, in 1985, my mother and I drove through the mountains of Lebanon, across the border to Syria, Assad's Syria, and waited there. Then we flew back to Newark. I don't know the details, and I don't remember it ever happening, and I don't see Syria again for more than 2 decades. Alan Kurdi was wearing a red t-shirt when he washed up dead on a beach in Turkey. The world saw Alan Kurdi, age 3, after he was dead. Only for a moment, but still we saw. And we felt good about ourselves for having seen Alan Kurdi. Alan was kind of light-skinned and not uncomfortably skinny. Also, you couldn't see his face, which is always useful to not see the eyes. Yemenis are generally very skinny, and generally, although not exclusively browner, and therefore much more difficult to see. Perhaps it's not that no one sees them so much as no one really looks at them with their skinny, dead brown babies. Another Yemeni baby died today. More than one, and in this case, baby is inaccurate. This one was either a fetus or a preemie, but you couldn't tell for sure from the picture. It might have been expelled from its mother's womb. We really try to figure it out, but we can't tell. Do you call a body an it anyway? We do in our air-conditioned newsroom. Now the photo was deemed too graphic to publish, so I will describe it here. There's no need for a graphic content warning because it's just words. Nice and linear and concise and in English. I don't know the baby's name because the baby might not have had a name because the baby might not have been born, and anyway, it's bad luck to say the name before birth. The baby is as small as the medic's outstretched hands. It fits neatly into the palms of his outstretched hands, except for the nubby little arms, which flap down from the fleshy part of his palms. The baby is burned to what would be described as a crisp. The little burned arm nubs are exceptionally flappy. It is a burned, flappy, little Yemeni, almost human, small enough to fit in the outstretched palms of the medic's hands. The nubs flap behind my eyelids every night for a week. We don't publish the picture. It's too graphic, and people are too sensitive. Those of us who count as people with sensibilities. At a bar once in Beirut, right after the war, the 2006 one, a photographer is tacking his pictures of a burning Eiffel Tower to the wall. Torino, the tiny pub with the red lights. He tells me about hostile environment training and how it's not whether you make the right decision, it's how fast you can make the decision. Good journalists decide on the spot. I can't decide anything on the spot. What's real and what's not real, and what the story is actually about, and what's mine and what's been forced into me, and what my tongue is, and if I even have one. The photographer writes the name of a woman down on the back of one of his burning Eiffel Tower Polaroids. 2 years later, that woman becomes my first bureau chief, through no connection to the photographer. Life is strange that way. The bartender at Torino begs me to make peace with my father, whom no one has seen in years. He is handsome and intelligent and patient, the bartender with the messenger bag. He brings levity to life, connection to a city, a world that was never really mine. The bartender is long estranged from his father. When his father died, he cried for days at his grave. He asked him out loud for forgiveness. Don't wait until you're at his grave. But I buried my father a long time ago, I remind him, and I don't need forgiveness. But I do. I need forgiveness every day, because complicit does not begin to describe it. To write from and in that same pipeline that disfigured my people, my history, my land, my family. To write in the very language and for the very people who did it, which is also your language and who are also your people. And to do it so that you are liked, so that you are tagged. To be popular because your brand is your currency. To sell out every minute of every day and to be thanked for your part in our very disfiguration. To be willingly complicit in this, in the fact that my tax dollars fund the wheels on the planes bombing the babies of my people. I need forgiveness every day. I need it from little Ali, from Baida, because this job is really ultimately all about us and our needs. Because when I stepped away for a minute to leave our world and go back to school, it was like someone had turned the lights out and I was just standing there in the dark, waiting for an end to something that was already dead. The blue-eyed photographer and I are in Riyadh, backstage at the 2018 Arab Fashion Week. It's my increasingly not-so-secret ambition to ditch journalism, ditch academia, and become an esthetician like my aunt, the youngest of the four whom Judith left behind. Except I hate social media, which apparently is career suicide for both journalists and makeup artists. Cameras are banned at this fashion week. We've smuggled our cameras in beneath the abayas and in one large backpack, thanks to the Italian charm of the blue-eyed photographer. Blue eyes go a long, long way where we're from. Tony said it all in 1969, and there's not much more to add. Did you check your phone? The photographer's blue eyes look up from the lens, red with anger, grief. I've seen that look. I check my phone. Abdullah al-Qadiri is dead. Our stringer. Husband, son, father of a baby. Nearly decapitated in Yemen. Thankfully, someone later says, not on assignment for us. Thankfully. In Philly, years earlier, my cousin calls me one January afternoon and asks if I've checked Facebook. I never want to check my Facebook. Did you at least read the Times today? But I stopped reading the English news the minute I stepped away from the field. Exasperated, she tells me Layla is dead, Layla Alawi, an Al-Qaeda bullet in Burkina Faso, 2 weeks after I last saw her in Beirut. I try to explain to my therapist in Philadelphia that it's not trauma or post-traumatic stress, although it's probably a disorder, that the mind can actually bear this world. Maybe we are always a little bit depressed. Maybe sometimes it's not just war. It's the rest of the world that leaves you traumatized. And maybe there is no possible way to tell the stories we should, to pretend they are something other than stories. I am waiting to go to Yemen, but you don't have to go anywhere anymore to be covering your beat. Plenty of great work gets done from a distance, my boss reminds me, and we need that distance, because we're not far enough away. Ali Abdullah Saleh is killed, and Sana'a collapses again. Our stringers are trapped again. I call a contact, a dear friend, to make sure she is okay. For the first time in a year, she loses it. She saw a child scoop water up from the side of the road and drink it because people can't afford to buy water. A camp for the internally displaced, who, if their ports weren't under blockade, would have boarded boats and turned into refugees, but for now they are IDPs, internally displaced persons. That camp is bombed. A boat of Ethiopian and Somali refugees is spotted by the Yemeni Coast Guard, so the smugglers throw people into the water and probably stomp on their heads to keep them down. Another boat capsizes. She loses it. The next month, when we meet in person, she thanks me for my dedication, which took the form of using my phone, paid for by my company, from an air-conditioned flat in a high-rise in Dubai. She thanks me for my stories. I don't know where little Ali and Baida are now, but Mazhar is dead, and Abdullah is dead, and Layla is dead, and Barra is dead. My cousin Joe is dead, and Ramzi is also my cousin, and he is also dead. Muhammad has no eyes or left arm anymore, and the other Muhammad is in jail. I am in Dubai now, and my business card says I cover Yemen. I am in Dubai now, being thanked for caring, and 6 years after little Ali put on his little red t-shirt that morning, the room starts its lilting, comforting spin again.
Welcome back, dear audience. I'm going to get others involved. It's a Friday night, and I think we'd like to keep this as rich as possible. So as soon as I see any comments or questions, I'll convey them with the assistance of my colleagues. But in the meantime, perhaps I can draw from our distinguished artist contributors any reactions they may volunteer to their having gone through the experience of tonight's show, featuring works by other people relating to the theme of home and holidays. And you're welcome to volunteer and unmute yourself.
Well, I would volunteer a big thank you to Al-Bustan and Ustad Muhannad for putting all of this together. We were not the most cheerful bunch, but but we just shared what we had. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, I think that I definitely made myself cry just listening to myself. And then Natasha, I just was crying the whole time. Yeah, that's home, I guess.
You know, it's not cheerful, but I'm so proud. Pride is, you know, it's not the word, but just to see the legacy being carried on and to see us, you know, Noam and Ahmad not shying away from the complexity and from the areas of shame in our past, areas of shame in my past. It's something that I aspire to. I was touched and moved. And my mother, I got my mother here with me from Beirut, and she was very moved. I feel like I should have probably given her a heads up, like Ahmad and Noam's work. But I'm so proud to be part of this community that's really creating and carrying on the stories that made us who we are and brought us here.
On a lighter note, are any of you going home for the holidays?
I'm certainly not. So I will enjoy the biblical Bethlehem from afar. It's not easy getting there, and especially during COVID. I think what I related is the Jisr experience before COVID, which has become maybe 10 times more complicated after COVID. So this will be maybe the subject of Jisr 2, the sequel or something like that. But yeah, it seems to be the time to stay put.
Kind words from Karima Abu Saab. This was amazing. Lots of tears. Beautifully done. Thank you. Another comment thanking you all for bearing it.
If I could ask, I'm really, really intrigued by the experience of writing in English. I'm a native bilingual, like this is, but you know, Noam, I could hear the histories in your English, and Ahmad, your English sounded so familiar because so I'm wondering if, I don't know if you guys feel comfortable just talking to me a little bit about the choice, or maybe not the choice, that English, bitter English, you know?
Yeah, that's, I don't know, maybe, could you touch on that? before me now?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about it actually, listening to your poetry, and I was like, oh, that's a choice to write poetry in English. I don't know if I could do that. You know, so I lived in France until I was 27, and I moved to the US maybe like it's been almost 10 years. It's weird. It's weird that I don't think I could write those things in French. And I think that English gives me that distance, you know, because I feel like in French sometimes I would not be able to access that language, or the feelings would be too close to me, you know, in this way where it would be crushing. But it's weird because I think that, like, I don't know if I would write the same thing in French, is what I would say. Yeah, it would be a different story completely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the choice to write in English was an aftermath of being away from Palestine for a long period of time, maybe 10 years, with many failed attempts to write in Arabic, or feeling that I was writing, or feeling that my writing is Arabic, is deprived from my living experience, because it was so textual. I was kind of reading and writing, and the world was passing me by. And I definitely got to a point where I wanted to exile myself from Arabic so I can try seriously writing in English. And this coincided with me coming to Philly in particular. And this was a very conscious decision to stop writing in Arabic altogether and to write in English for the period of time that produced bitter English. And then after that, I went back to writing in Arabic. But it was sort of a linguistic experiment that I wanted through it to record my discomfort with the English language for the main part. And now, strangely, when I feel too comfortable with English, I go back to writing in Arabic, because I like feeling the discomfort as a way of producing something.
That's your comfort zone is the discomfort.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Maybe as a Palestinian, we're so used to discomfort that once we feel comfortable, we feel guilty.
In our correspondence by text, Ahmad responded in English until most recently he switched to Arabic, I noticed.
Yeah.
Al Pascal says, such a stunning, brave event. Thank you all for sharing your art, your work. And then from fan of Al-Bustan extraordinaire, Sue Frank asks, thank you. I would love to know more about the music choices that were made. They punctuated the voice contributions strikingly. I suppose a question that I maybe, as Hannah responds to this, if I may ask how you feel about how your pieces have interacted with the readings now that you've sat through the evening.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for including me in this event. I joined really last minute, and it was really cool to yeah, to see everything together, to hear the poems for me for the first time, and after just having basically read your bios, and to hear how the music fit in. And I think, and I hope that you would agree that it did fit pretty well. I had a little bit of help, like, oh, the first set is, maybe think about just the pacing of, because some of the pieces were more, I guess, like fast paced or energetic than others. But I think that it worked well. I think that I had read everyone's bios that Al-Bustan sent me, and so it was really helpful and inspiring in terms of thinking about what kind of music to play, because there are a lot of options. I definitely could have gone like in different directions, and I think that I often come back to the music of Bartok as music that is so much just, it's actually just speaking. And musicians actually, when we work on music by Bartok, that was the first two songs that I played. We talk about articulation, and it's vocal, it's totally vocal. And so I think poetry is like the perfect thing to go with it, because it's not, with a lot of Western classical music, everything is really lyrical and smooth. But Bartok's music is really punctuated, and it's all about understanding Hungarian, the language. And so these songs, which were inspired by other cultures, they're also inspired by language. Bartok, he studied language. He heard Turkish. He heard, different Balkan language, and he was really himself like a researcher. So I think in that sense, it's a cool kind of thing to insert into a performance that's of poetry, where the main event is hearing voices. And it's kind of especially interesting with having three poets who, right, like the poems are in English, but there are different sort of pronunciations and different accents and different voicings. And so it's kind of cool just thinking about it from like a linguistic perspective. And then the last piece, that choice, which I do think felt like the right piece. Such a wild piece, and really full of contrast. And it's, the person who wrote it, she is someone for whom home is a very complex thing as well. And her husband is from Syria, she's from Lebanon. It's very difficult for them to get to go home at all. And she's lived away from home for a lot of her life, and has a complex and interesting family history. And so I think there's a lot of emotion in her music that comes from that. And so it's I think it reflects a lot of the themes that we heard tonight in the poem. So it makes it very special. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanna comment. I'm writing this article for Poetry magazine about the exophonic experience, and they've asked me specifically to talk about Al-Bustan. I think I my experience with Al-Bustan, I think I told this to you, Muhannad. But as I'm sorry, there's something, as Sarah just, or as Hannah just said, sorry. I think I'm kind of arguing that all arts are essentially linguistic. They come back to language and this experience of translating language into something other, into something visual or into something musical, or so it doesn't surprise me that a composer is very much obsessed with sort of the workings of language. in order to produce a piece of music. And I think all arts go back to the basic matter that goes through us, which is language, and which I think the more that you experience of the language, the richer your artistic output is going to be. So that idea that language produces all art is really, I think, very important, especially for people that have lived between languages. They know how important that is for their art. That's why I think art sort of produces like another language that is understood by everyone other than the language that we speak in to communicate and make meaning, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Ahmed. We have a question from Travis Conrad. Such a moving event. Each artist presented from a lens much deeper than the commoner tends to view the world. Does anyone wish to speak on the mentality or the inspiration while creating from such a state? I suppose the state of being, having a microscope to these ideas of distance and home and, you know, displacement, or the kind of schism that comes from moving emotionally or physically across regions in one's life.
I can start, unless, you know, you guys, because I can see, you know, you're thinking through it. Mine is my state, let's say, when I was writing it, I think started quite straightforward, because I was asked to contribute to an anthology, an essay on my experience covering the Arab world as Bint Arab, as an Arab. And so I started to write that, and then it just, you know, it spiraled. And then I realized that this is the story of how I became a journalist. You know, it's a story of, you know, I moved back to Beirut when I was 10. And what do you do in Lebanon if you're kind of justice oriented and fluent enough in a few languages? Generally, a lot of us tend to become journalists. So to me, the immediate story was not that interesting. What was interesting to me was how much of this wasn't actually me, my choice or my career. It's built on the shoulders of all these people that came before me that have not been recorded in history. So the more I wrote, although it was straightforward to begin with, the more I wrote, the deeper into despair I plunged. And the more despaired I became, the more I wanted to write. So, and now I'm still in a state of despair, and I'm still hopeful at the same time. The deeper the despair, the more I want to hope. So it started out straightforward, and then it brought me into the company of, you know, the writers that we have today.
Just brilliantly stated. Ahmed,
I want to follow and agree that in a way, despair sort of makes you hit a state of silence, of like the unspeakable. And strangely, that prompts you to say something. And that's strangely the state that we live in as immigrants and as people who have been displaced and have been taken out of our first environment, basically. We're sort of destined to feel that way, and definitely, as Natasha said, we're as we plunge more into that despair, we rebel against it by continuing.
Noam, any notions?
Yeah, I think my writing comes from the place of answering the question, where are you from and who are your people? And I think that, the Arab world is such a newer invention too, right? It's like if you go 100 years ago and 200 years ago, then what are actually our lineages and what does that look like? And that requires complexity, right? I think that in the US, people love binaries and they love those little boxes of like you're this or you're that. And I think that that's not the reality of the world, and especially not of the Arab world. And, I wish they taught geography and history better in this country so that people could see some of those complexities. But also, I do think that, the question of despair, I know that I started writing a lot more in May when the situation in Palestine was really like in the media, and there was a lot of interest in that. And I felt like it was really important for me as somebody who holds an Israeli passport and was Jewish to talk about those stories, because I get to do that, right? And other people are in more danger when they do that, right? And I do get called an anti-Semite regularly, and it is what it is. But I think that that's really important. And through that experience of talking about my own life, I've connected with a lot more Jewish Arabs. And those are stories that I find really important because of the fact that, people conflate Arab and Muslim, and people don't quite understand what those identities actually are. And that's on purpose, right? That's, again, because the world of binaries really requires us to be just one thing. So yeah, just answering those questions of who are your people and where are you from brings that complexity.
That is touching and profound. Thank you. Thank you. I think considering that it's a Friday night and that we've got to save some energy for all the merriment to come, that I hope that we all manage to locate time to partake of. I would like to bring the evening to a near close. I'd like to thank Jacob Immert for his masterful streaming management, and Dave Tavani, along with our own Sarah Trad and Piers Carr for their video work. We especially, and finally, thank our dear audience joining us from rooms near and far. We wish you the best holidays possible for you and look forward to joining you, be it in person or remotely, in 2022. وكل عام وأنتم بخير. Good night.
شكرا. كل عام وانتم بخير. Happy holidays.